Hello, gamers from around the world. This is Boxenberger, the video game enthusiast from Germany, and I would like to welcome you to today's show, The World of Gaming, your number one podcast where we discuss everything that the world of gaming has to offer, games, news, technology, and as always, we do that with my co-host, Wandering Dutch. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well indeed. Yes, had an awesome show yesterday as well with yourself. Talked some awesome different topics. We haven't spoke about this yesterday, so it'll be good to speak about this one. Of course, it broke. I think was it just before or just after?
Just after the show. Yeah.
So it's gonna be a nice, interesting, and different topic to speak about. So I'm looking forward to it, and great to have Luke back again.
Absolutely. Fantastic segue to welcome our guest today. You're on here not for the first time. You've been on here before, so I hope a lot of people already know you. In case they don't, Luke, first, welcome to the show and tell everyone who you are and where they can find you.
It's not been that long actually. That was last on here, and
like 4 weeks or so.
Yeah, about 4 weeks, and got a great invite, very grateful to come on, and actually after the invite, then the Brazil Cade stuff broke. So it was like fate that I was coming back on really. For those who don't know, I suppose I'm a mergers and acquisitions lawyer by trade. So I have dealt with competition authorities, including the CMA and EU Commission and other ones as well. That's what I do. So I'm pretty well versed in this stuff. I'd say it's my job. It's a good time to be a lawyer and in gaming, in a hobby, because there's a lot of actually legal crossover stuff going on. So it's really interesting.
Indeed, and that's why we're so honored to have you on here again. It was literally by accident that this broke. Yeah. I learned that you usually have your own show an hour later, and I learned, okay, you're free this evening. I just reached out, hey, you want to join? And like 30 minutes later, the entire Brazil thing broke. So it's an absolute honor to have you on, and we will pick your brain about everything that happened.
Sure.
But first, I want to welcome also the great community. The chat is already filling up with a lot of familiar names. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you for tuning in. Drop your questions in the chat. We have the expert right here on the panel, here to my left. And it's going to be an awesome show because, yes, of course, we are going to talk today about Brazil approving the ABK deal and a lot of interesting statements in that approval. But we will also talk about PlayStation games on PC and a big interview with Herman Holst. We will talk about something I'm particularly excited about. A lot of new Witcher games have been announced. We will talk about a couple of other games that have been announced, like the new Need for Speed and Dead Space trailer. We will once again tackle Halo and Unreal Engine. We have a couple of cool Call of Duty news and a lot more. But first, let's talk about the games of the week. And I almost forgot, before we talk about the games of the week, we have already the first super chat coming in from Sith Lord. Thank you so much for the support, man. He says, Redfall coming in March. The year of Xbox has begun. Dude, did I miss something? Was the release date for Redfall?
It might have been actually. I posted a video in our chat earlier, and that was just them talking about the story. So I don't know whether or not there was something after that, but they did a video based on the story of Redfall and how it begins, etc. So,
okay. Sweet. Okay. So, guys, I it might have just broke because he dropped the super chat even before the show started. So let us know if we just missed something because we were sitting in the green room and chatting about our day jobs. So good stuff. And Paul also sends in a super chat for being a channel member for 17 months, which is absolutely bonkers. You rock big time, man. And he says, "Evening, brothers. A shout out to Luke, the CMA expert." Shout out indeed. Shout out indeed. But before we talk about the entire thing, I definitely want to know, not just from everyone here in chat, what have you been playing? But Luke, what has kept you busy these days?
I mean, I would have said for the last week or so, not much until a couple of days ago. So I've been playing a little bit of Forza Horizon 5, which is just
nice.
Just
never
amazing.
Go wrong with that.
Yeah. just great. Mainly the Hot Wheels expansion, which is a lot of fun. And I just love sometimes I just like booting that game up just to look at it, just to be like, this is really incredible. So playing that, and then the big thing that I was looking forward to is the release of Watch 2. So big fan of the original. I put probably over 1,000 hours into that on PC.
Wow.
Okay. So very much looking forward to it. Unfortunately for Overwatch 2, the servers have just been absolutely hammered. So I have played quite a bit, maybe 2 hours or so, but not as much as I would have liked. I've got the battle pass, and I've been enjoying what I can get on it greatly. I think it's really great. It's not a revolution by any means, but it's a really, really good game. Nice. Yeah, and randomly as well, I've been playing a little bit of Chivalry 2 because that was on.
How is
on
that?
game?
Yes,
it's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. So I played it with some friends for a couple of hours, and it was only meant to be an hour, and it turned into a couple of hours, which I think is a good recommendation for the game. It's just really silly fun. And I would recommend, if you have Game Pass, that you go and check it out because it's a lot of fun.
Nice. I have to check it out definitely, and I also want to play Overwatch. Just haven't gotten around to it yet. It's downloaded though. It's downloaded.
That's half the battle.
Half the battle, right? Especially with my super slow internet, definitely. Definitely. What have people been playing in chat? Malesco plays Diablo 3. The new season is keeping him busy. You can never go wrong with Diablo 3. Never. Absolutely. Dude, hit me up if you want a Paragon level 300 sorcerer to support you. I'm always open for Diablo 3. It's one of the 3 games that I never uninstall on my Xbox. I have Diablo is always installed. I have always The Witcher installed, and Skyrim. These are the 3 that never leave my Xbox. So always good to play that. Mr. Joanna Dark plays Splatoon 3. Ooh. Nice.
Yeah. I've also been playing that. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah. It's
my kids are asking me whether I can buy it for them. I haven't decided yet.
You should do it. Be a good dad. Go on, buy them Splatoon.
They have like an Xbox, a PlayStation, a Nintendo Switch.
It's never enough. It's never enough.
Thousands of games. I think, man, if I had such a dad when I grew up, I probably wouldn't have made it through school, though. God. What else have people been playing? Bellantone, Skyrim, and Medieval Dynasty, which is absolutely cool. Portal Player, Protois. I have heard nothing but good things about that game, man. Have not played it yet. Dustin is playing Ni no Kuni, and John T.J. sends in an incredible generous super chat of $50. Man, thank you so much. I'm speechless, man, which is not good if you want to host a podcast. He has to say, hey guys, I got to ask, since Jim Ryan is being a sleazebag, should they put Call of Duty in Game Pass right after the deal closes, because Brazil approved it with no restrictions? I think Microsoft needs to be petty. What do you think?
I've got an easy response for that. No, as much as we want them to be petty, because of course it's sometimes you fight fire with fire. I think on this occasion, Microsoft are trying to preserve their image and will continue to try and preserve their image because their image overall as the company is actually above the earnings. As far as they're concerned, if anything happens to the image or what they do, or anything that's detrimental to their image, that overall affects the share price. They don't care about the actual revenue per se. It's more, are the shareholders happy with the performance of the company? Anything to cause detrimental effect of that is something they'll avoid. So, and Phil Spencer's a man of his word. He essentially says something which was minimum 3 years, and that's what they'll stick to. Whether or not it goes into Game Pass is another thing, but he said minimum 3 years it's staying on the platform. They didn't say it's never going into Game Pass throughout the 3 years. So we shall see.
Yeah. Okay. What do you think, Luke? Should it become exclusive?
I mean, for Microsoft's sake, I don't think so. Actually, I mean, they've said that it simply wouldn't be profitable if it was. So, Dutch is right. Who are the directors of Microsoft and Phil Spencer especially acting for? They're acting for the best interests of the company. How do you define the company? It's by reference to its shareholders, and doing decisions like that, which would give them maybe some competitive advantage to some extent, but would actually be detrimental to probably both their share price and also their revenue, because then the biggest platform for Call of Duty doesn't get Call of Duty, which is PlayStation, is not acting in the interest of the company. So whether they put it on Game Pass is another matter. I mean, I think obviously
that's a given. Yeah,
that's the play for them, right?
Yeah.
That's one of the whole reasons for this. Probably the reason for this acquisition is that. So yes, I do expect them to do that.
Yeah, well, Game Pass,
other regulators.
I agree. I do get the train of thought, though. We all want Sony to have higher competition, and of course, taking such a big franchise could really move the needle in terms of market shares, and probably that would put a little bit more pressure on Sony, which is what it feels like what they need right now. I think with Call of Duty, they can't do it. They have been too publicly honest about what they want to do, that they want to keep it at least for a couple more years, whether that's 3 years after the existing contracts, or I don't know, 2 or 4, I don't know. But I don't think that they will do it with that. I think if they would do exclusive things, it's going to be with the Blizzard IPs. I think there's a good chance that you see maybe even already the next add-on for Diablo then, because Diablo is still probably going to come out on all platforms, Diablo 4. Then, the first big expansion comes 3 months early or stuff like that. And then you will see that transition happening. Yeah.
I think additionally to that as well, I think what we probably will end up seeing, because of course they've said they'll honor the contract, which they did the same with Bethesda, is the likelihood is we'll see the back catalogue of older Call of Duty games go into Game Pass. And Call of Duty, the new one, which comes up, won't be on there until that exclusivity agreement, or the advertising agreement, essentially, not exclusivity, has run its course.
And sorry, Tron TJ sends in another $5. Thank you, so man. He adds up on the first statement. No, not exclusive. I'm saying just putting it in Game Pass after the deal. And I have no doubt that this is going to be one of the very first moves. As soon as the ink is dry, you will see as many Activision Blizzard games on Game Pass. It's gonna be like with Bethesda, where they had that big we are now one big family showcase, and then they announced, and today you have 25 legacy titles. I think that's what's definitely gonna happen. And Call of Duty will be in there as well. But we will talk about everything from Brazil a little bit more in detail in a second. Dutch, I also want to know from you, what have you been playing?
Yes, so Grounded, Sea of Thieves, and FIFA. And actually, I got a bit annoyed with FIFA last night because it decided to kick me off the profile mid-season games. So I'd played like 3 matches in the season and kicked us off the profile. It didn't save. Then the game booted us out of the career, and I'd lost those 3 games I'd already played. So when I go back into the save, I've lost progression. So I was like, that is such an annoying bug. So I just turned the game off. I was like, nope, that's it. I've just wasted like 2 hours of my life playing these games for no reason. So yeah, just turned it off. So other than that, though, I'm enjoying Grounded, enjoying Sea of Thieves.
Oh yeah, man! I have some footage from us playing Grounded actually ready to go, so we can watch a little bit. Other than our beautiful faces, and I have to switch the overlay again. So there you go.
And other than that, reinstalled Cyberpunk.
Okay, there goes another 80 hours.
Yeah. And I'm also going to be installing Chivalry 2 because I've heard nothing but good things about that, and I want to play it with the community. So I'm going to be setting up a community night on Chivalry 2, and I think that'll be hilarious.
That sounds good.
I've seen some of the things you can do in that game and how crazy it gets, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm really looking forward to it.
I might have to download it then again also, because it sounds like a lot of fun, man. And yeah, I've been playing obviously Grounded with you. Guys, if it looks like we have no idea what we are doing, then it's exactly because it was in the first hour. This is the very first hour that Dutch and I have played Grounded ever. So we were really like figuring out what the heck we are supposed to do. But it is surprisingly addictive, that game. I like the story mode. I'm really enjoying my time with it. And other than that, I have been spending, again, way too much time on Age of Empires. It's just like... yesterday, Mr. Joy in the Dark said to me, I need an intervention, and it's probably exactly what I need. But man, season 2 is coming to an end, and I wanna end it at least in Gold 3, if not Platinum 1 rank. But man, people have been getting so good at the game. It's really, really tough right now, but I'm loving it. Just... So yeah, that's what I've been playing, and I want to say another big thank you to Tronty J, who sends in another super chat of $5. Man, your generosity knows no limits. Thank you so much, man. And he says, keep up the great content, guys. Gotta go back to work. I'll catch the rest of the show later. Tronty J, have an awesome day at work. Thanks for stepping by. Thanks so much for the support, and we talk to each other soon, man. And Smitty Smith sends in also a super chat for being a channel member for 17 months, which is ridiculously long. And I think Smitty is the longest channel member I have. So shout out to you. He beat Paul for like 10 seconds. So which is awesome to see, man. And he says, salute to Boxenberger, Luke, Dutch, and the chat. Salute to you, brother. Salute to you. All right, guys. But with that, let's get to the news of the week. All right. Yes, guys, the jingles are back. Last week we forgot them, Dutch. It wasn't the same. It just wasn't.
No, I still did the dance, though. It's fine.
All right, guys. Yesterday, for me, it was late evening. I actually learned about this morning. The Brazilian regulatory CADE approved the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal without any restrictions. And there were a couple of very interesting statements from in that approval that I want to read a couple of them because they talked a lot about the stuff that we have been talking for the last months now, about exclusivity, about the importance of Call of Duty, and how this will impact the the gaming industry. So just bear with me. I'm going to read a couple of these statements, and then we will pick Luke's brain about everything that was said in Brazil, and especially what that means for the CMA and the EU, and maybe even the FTC, because we also got a couple of news from the FTC as well. We'll get to that. So they said exclusive games are a benchmark of competition between Microsoft and Sony Interactive Entertainment, although no company has so far developed or acquired an exclusive game that has decisively shifted the balance in favor of a console. This is because proprietary exclusive games are less popular and represent less revenue than third-party AAA games, which until then are available on Xbox and PlayStation. As already seen, Nintendo does not currently rely on any content from Activision Blizzard to compete in the market. In turn, Sony has several predicates: a strength of the world's leading brand for more than 20 years, extensive experience in the sector, largest user base, largest install base of consoles, robust catalog of exclusive games, partnerships with multiple publishers, brand loyal consumers, etc., which should contribute to maintaining the competitiveness of PlayStation in a possible post-operation scenario, even in the face of possible loss of access to Activision Blizzard content. Furthermore, it is important to highlight that the central objective of Cade's activities is the protection of competition as a means of promoting the well-being of Brazilian consumers and not the defense of the particular interest of a specific competitor. And this is, by the way, really a shot fired towards Sony. If you ask me, at least for me as a non-lawyer, it reads like this. They also added, in this sense, although it is recognized that part of the users of PlayStation consoles from Sony could decide to migrate to Xbox in the event that Activision Blizzard games, and especially Call of Duty, become exclusive to the Microsoft ecosystem, Cade does not believe that such a possibility represents in itself a risk to competition in the console market as a whole. So, a lot to digest. Really a lot to digest here. Luke, how can we interpret these statements from Cade?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting stuff. I don't think it's that surprising. At least I wasn't that surprised when I read it. I think Cade historically, years ago, was seen as pretty stringent antitrust regulator. Not as much now because of various things that have gone on in Brazil and in terms of how that entity is treated, etc. Albeit they are still seemingly, a respected antitrust regulator. So personally, I think the rationale that they gave for everything, I agree with it. I think it's something you can look at, and I don't think anything that they said was particularly controversial. Right. And I think it's important to remember that regulators, competition regulators are just doing the best they can. They have to greatly hypothesize about outcomes in a particular market, sometimes in emerging markets. And that hypothesis is very difficult because you can't predict the future, right? So you have to make a heavily analyzed guess about what you think the impact of a particular merger or acquisition will be on a particular market or subsets of markets. And market definition in itself is a really difficult analysis. Having done it, it's a nightmare at times. But so I think nothing that they said was particularly surprising. Do I think that it shade with the point they made around, protection of competitors and stuff? I don't think so. Although it does read quite similar to shade. I think what people have to remember is that all competition regulators are trying to look at ultimately what is the end game impact on consumers in a particular market, and is that a negative or a positive, or is it neutral? The way that the CMA undertake their analysis is by reference to rivalry. So when the CMA do analysis and when they put out their analysis, what they tend to focus on, and I think this is the thing that gets picked up, is how does it impact competitors, in particular primary competitors of whoever's applying for approval of the merger.
Yeah.
And so the CMA's analysis was heavily Sony focused for that reason. But ultimately, what the CMA are looking at is still consumers, but they're looking at it through a different purview. So they're saying, will this merger have an impact? Will it substantially lessen competition to the extent where a rivalry is kind of upset by this? Because ultimately rivalry between companies is the thing that benefits consumers. So the way that the CMA look at it is saying, is this going to swing the balance too far in favor of one entity, upset the rivalry, and ultimately be detrimental to consumers? But obviously the way that they phrase that often makes it seem like they're only really concerned with, how protecting an interest in the market, which they're not. I think people get caught up on that, but if you look at the CMA's other analysis of any other industry, they do exactly the same thing as they've done here. So Cade is a bit more Cade do the same thing, right? They're still looking at competition, they're still looking at rivalry, but their analysis is that they don't think it's going to upset rivalry to such an extent. Even worst case scenario where Activision Blizzard content is withheld from major competitors, they don't think that will impact rivalry to such an extent that it would be detrimental to consumers. And that's really what that point's about, where they're talking about we don't really care about what happens to a competitor. They do care, but their job isn't correctly to protect someone's interest in a market. It's to protect it to the extent that if they don't protect it, someone else will become so dominant that it will affect consumers. So it was really interesting reading, and shout out as well, I think it was Idis on the Reset Era forum who translated a lot of this from Portuguese, who is him or herself a competition lawyer, funnily enough, or an M&A lawyer as well. So and it's really interesting stuff, and I don't think it's too surprising. It's interesting, and yes, I'm here to take questions.
Absolutely, guys. Drop your questions in the chat. We will try to answer them. I want to briefly get to Dutch. What do you think about these statements from Cade? How do they read to you as a non-lawyer? Did you interpret them similarly like I did?
Oh, certainly. I mean, obviously, I'd look through contracts on a daily basis, but for other things, so I'd still read through contractual terms a lot. But in terms of the legal writing, of course, I just sent you in the chat there as well, the second section, which Luke has seen as well, which is the conclusions, essentially, and it's 6 kind of more detailed breakdowns, and those are a little bit more telling as to kind of some of the findings that they went through. So, of course, it says, regarding horizontal overlaps verified in the markets of game publishing, game distribution, or online advertising and licensing for merchandising products, analysis carried out indicated that the operation would not be able to promote significant changes in the respective offer structures in any of the scenarios considered, either because the concentration generated was less than 20%, or because the low variation in the HHI pointed to the inexistence of causal link between AC and possible possibility of exercising market power according to parameters. Of course, that's a little bit more in depth. That's probably a little bit. We need to see the actual terms that they broke down in order to see what that was about. Full terms, anyway. With regards to what possible vertical effects, an attempt was made to assess whether, as a result of the transaction, Microsoft would have the ability or incentives to close any of the vertically related or complementary markets. Third point, as for the possibility of closing the game publishing market upstream, it was found that despite Microsoft having control of a relevant portion of the market of the console and digital game distribution market, downstream, the company would not have incentives to make it difficult for publishers competing with Activision Blizzard to access its platform, as this would necessarily imply a reduction in quantity and variety of the catalogue of games available in the Xbox ecosystem, making the company's products and services less attractive to consumers. So essentially, they're saying it wouldn't be in their best interest anyway, as a company, to take that away from other platforms. It says the point 4, with regard to the possibility of closing downstream markets, the analysis pointed out that despite the relevance and popularity, Activision Blizzard games, and in particular the Call of Duty series, would not be essential assets to the performance of Microsoft's current and potential competitors in the console and digital game distribution market, considering in the latter, both digital stores and multiple game subscription services for PC and consoles. Thus, even if Activision Blizzard game catalog were to become exclusive to the Microsoft ecosystem after the transaction, SG/Cade considers that such exclusivity would not result in a substantial reduction in the level of competition in the downstream markets, even if it would translate into a competitive advantage for Microsoft. Furthermore, it is important to highlight that central objectives of Cade's activities, and this is a little bit of a dig towards PlayStation, I do think. The central objective of Cade's activities is the protection of the competition as means of promoting a well-being of Brazilian consumers, and not the defense of a particular interest of a specific competitor. After all, one cannot lose sight of the fact that the holder of the legal assets protected by law number, and of course then they state the number of the law, is the collectivity and not the competitor/economic agent as an individual entity. In this sense, although it is recognized that part of the users of PlayStation consoles from Sony could decide to migrate to Xbox in the event that Activision Blizzard games, and especially Call of Duty, become exclusive to Microsoft's ecosystem, SGK does not believe that such a possibility represents in itself a risk to competition in the console market as a whole. Finally, in relation to the existing complementary between activities, and of course this is loosely translated, I think, from, obviously you've got Portuguese and Brazilian Portuguese, so there might be some kind of word dissimilarities here. Between activities of Microsoft and Activision Blizzard in the game publishing markets, and especially in the mobile games segment and online advertising, it was found that the shares held by parties in these segments in all scenarios examined are well below the minimum percentage considered for purpose of presumption of possible closing the market as defined in Article 8. It is concluded, therefore, that possible vertical integrations and complementaries that may be generated or reinforced by the transaction do not give rise to significant risks in competition, since no elements were identified that allows inferring the closure of any of the vertical related markets. In view of the foregoing, it is concluded that present merger is approved without restriction. To me, that just kind of hammers around all the points that we've been speaking of a lot of the time.
For months, actually, yeah.
None of what this deal represents would cause a significant harm to any of the competitors. And it even goes down to recent acquisitions that Sony have approved. And when they're looking at competition in the market, they're looking at competitions for each of these IPs individually as well. So what is similar to? What is a competition to this game? What is competition to this game? Would that present a risk? Would that present lack of competition? When they're looking at Call of Duty, they're looking at, okay, they've got Bungie, so they've got Destiny 2, which is a huge FPS competitor. Then you have a look at Rainbow Six, which is still available. You have a look at Battlefield, which is still available. You have a look at all the other first-person shooters on the market.
Fortnite and all other shooters. Yeah.
Exactly. So they're looking at that as a whole as well and think, right, okay, well, each of these, and I think on the full breakdown, they do actually give some head-to-head kind of comparisons and say, well, and I think I saw on one of them, they specifically mentioned Nintendo and how Nintendo do not have, like, they operate strictly on exclusives and don't have anything to do with Activision Blizzard. Like, they've got
the quote was, Nintendo does not currently rely on any content from Activision Blizzard to compete in the market.
Yeah. And they are not harmed and are current market leader, essentially. So, it's essentially, like we were mentioning, pretty much every point, even if Microsoft, like, the only thing that Sony are consistently worried about, which is why they're kicking up such a fuss, is potential loss in revenue for Call of Duty microtransactions and Call of Duty sales on the platform. And that is one of two ways. Either the sales percentage is reduced by Microsoft in future kind of iterations of contracts, i.e. goes from 70-30 to 80-20 or something like that. Or, of course, Microsoft puts all the Call of Duties on Game Pass, in which case then that would provide a huge incentive for people to just get Game Pass and play Call of Duty there and not spend money on PlayStation. So that is the concern that Sony have, essentially. It's not for the wider deal. It is simply down to the fact that they would lose money from Call of Duty not being associated directly to PlayStation anymore, and having it on a better, more essentially consumer-friendly service that would save people money. And as rightfully kind of mentioned on this, again in point 5, they're just stipulating what most regulators will say. Our objective is to protect the consumer. It is not to protect singular entities. We're not going out there PlayStation's kicking up a fuss, but every other entity is absolutely fine with it. So we have to block this deal because PlayStation doesn't like it. That's not their objective. Their overall objective, of course, is to protect the market as a whole and the consumers within that market. So, of course, rightfully, I think that the points proven are very well put, very well thought out, and you can see the fact that they've done quite a lot of work to it. And, of course, this is in-depth investigations by Cade. So this is the stage, essentially the stage that CMA and the US regulators are going into now.
Exactly.
Is what
and I want to bring that question back to Luke here with the CMA. So we also learned this week that the CMA set a deadline for ruling the ABK deal out in March 2023. They have the deadline of March 1st, 2023 to publish the findings of the inquiry into Microsoft proposed acquisition of Activision Blizzard. So now with this approval in Brazil, Luke, from your expertise, does this somehow impact the decision process or even the timeline for the decision making in the UK with the CMA? Or are they just not looking at what do other countries think of a certain deal? How does this work?
So it won't impact really anything that the CMA do. What people have to remember is these are separate regulatory entities doing the same thing, but operating under completely different jurisdictions and different statutory timeframes that they have to deliver, an approval or a rejection or whatever in, right? So it won't be particularly influential to the CMA. Now, the CMA can, with the consent of the parties involved in a merger, they can reach out to other regulators, including those that have already approved the deal, for information or discussion around the same deal. And they have that even in their own merger guidance, so that they can do that. In practice, do they do it? Yes. Is it typically with CADE, the Brazilian regulator? I'd probably say no. It would typically be with the FTC or the DOJ or the EU Commission, because frankly, with no disrespect to CADE or any other regulator that aren't those three, the markets that the CMA, the EU Commission, and the FTC/DOJ represent are infinitesimally larger than the Brazilian market. So they're often the most important regulators, really, from a competition perspective. So it won't affect the CMA's decision, albeit it might indirectly affect it if they discuss it with CADE and see the conclusions they came to. But you have to remember that these are people at the end of it, right? They like any of us, we have differing views, and we can all be given a bunch of documents to analyze and come to differing conclusions. So I think for people, think this is like a death blow for the CMA or anybody who doesn't particularly like the merger initially, it doesn't quite work like that, because the CMA could just turn around and go, we don't like it at all. We want some undertaking, or we're just going to block it, entirely after phase 2. I don't think that's very likely, but it could happen. And in terms of time frame, it won't affect that either, unless the CMA come to the middle of their analysis and go, actually, this is ridiculous, let's just approve it. Because they have a statutory deadline of 24 weeks from the end of phase 1, essentially, which brings you to March 1st. And then they can extend that by 8 weeks if they feel they need more time to do so. Again, that's relatively rare, I'd say, but they can do that. So it's interesting. I think Cade have approved it, and I think Bobby Kotick or someone else said that there were another 2 that have already approved it as well. Saudi Arabia. I think the third one hypothesized was Dubai, was the UAE.
Okay, that would make sense.
So yeah, as if they care. So far it's all approvals. No restrictions at all on the approvals. But the big boys, so to speak, is still to come. So let's wait and see.
I was going to say, I think from Saudi Arabia's perspective as well, it looks like, because they were the first to approve the transaction, but as we've seen recently, they very much getting into gaming now through PIF with large investment. Yes. So it wouldn't be surprised to me if PIF have just went, where it is, guys, just approve it. Let's have some competition here. Let's just get this done. This is going to be spicy. This is going to be fun. So,
especially since they are all looking themselves into buying bigger publishers, which we learned last week. It would be weird if they would block or have any objections of such an acquisition right now. A couple of other things a lot of people missed in the discussion this week. We have also not a hard deadline, but an update from the FTC. A report from a deal reporter. They have reported basically everything right so far. So it's pretty legit source. They have a report that claims that US regulators are still on the staff level, but it's expected to progress through the Bureau of Competition and onto the commissioners over the coming weeks. And the report also says this would mean that the deal could be ruled out from the FTC by late November. Now, take it with a grain of salt, but given that the CMA now has a deadline in March, which seems relatively far away if you compare it to November from the FTC, and Brazil already approved. So, Luke, is this very typical that the CMA takes that long for this process? I mean, yes, you already mentioned you have like this 26 weeks for the phase 2. Okay, given, but why did this start so late then?
Yeah, I mean, it is typical that the CMA take this long.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of the 24-week phase 2 element, that's a statutory deadline that they have. They can take up to 24 weeks. In practice, as any of us, I think, who are reviewing something like this, they use the full 24 weeks, right? So that's why they always say their deadline is 24 weeks after, because they're not going to do it in 8, because they've got a lot of things to review. It's a really difficult review process. Yeah. So in terms of why it started late, that's probably nothing to do with the CMA. That's probably to do with Microsoft and Activision submitting their the merger application, essentially.
Okay.
They would have exchanged on the deal, which they did. I can't even remember when this was now. Back at January.
Yes.
Yeah. So they would have done that. They probably simultaneous to that were going through pre-notification, which is essentially where the lawyers get in contact with the regulators and start kind of talking through the process and talking through the considerations that a regulator might have. Meanwhile, they're putting together the applications, which are enormous, by the way. They are really big. Providing documents, getting them ready, and then there's a formal submission, and that formal submission then triggers, the actual kind of statutory time limits that each the CMA at least has to review it. So phase 1 in the case of the CMA. So it's not, CMA is not run by Sony fans or anything like that. It's just they probably took a long time, Microsoft and Activision, to formulate the submission to the CMA. Like for example, they only recently submitted to the EU Commission as well. So again, these are kind of the regulators that will take a long time to formulate your arguments in favor of the merger if you're Microsoft. So it's not too surprising. I guess the FTC are a bit different, and I'm not Hogue Law, so please defer to him on matters of US competition and antitrust. But as I understand it, the process with the FTC is a little bit different because they don't block deals as such. You have various waiting periods where they can ask for things like consent decrees in the US, and when those expire, that's pretty much it. If they really don't like something, they can kind of retrospectively try and take it to court, which again is something you can't do in the UK for the CMA. A little bit of a different process. So
just to add to that as well, I've heard with regards to that is something that they are extremely unlikely to do because it's extremely expensive to do so, of a case of that size, to try and take that to court and prove in court as well that it would be detrimental. So it's a highly unlikely process that they would actually take it to court to block it. So.
It's pretty unlikely. Generally, for the reasons that you say, it's very expensive. And they would have to be so convinced that something was bad for competition to even entertain doing something like that. It wouldn't be on a hypothesis basis, which typically the competition stuff is. It would be Nvidia and ARM, for example, where it's almost abundantly clear that that's potentially bad for competition. Yeah, exactly. It would be Microsoft buying Sony, right? That's the kind of thing that would typically trigger a court case. Not to say that smaller stuff doesn't happen. I mean, Microsoft would never be able to buy Sony, but not to say that the kind of lowest scale stuff than that doesn't get taken to court, because it does, and it has, but it is quite rare. And I mean, the court thing is just not a thing in the UK for the CMA. But yeah.
Oh, very, very interesting. We have. I have a couple of other questions, but I want to give a brief shout out to the amazing chat. We have over 100 people watching us live here right now. Welcome everyone to the show. You guys are awesome. And if you have any questions for Luke, drop them in the chat. He's gladly answering whatever he can. We have one from your good friend Scott. He says he was told that Jim Ryan was bribing the CMA.
I heard he gave them, all the members of the CMA, a PlayStation 5 and a copy of The Last of Us Part 1 remake.
He also invited them to the special level of PlayStation Stars. That is invite only. So
yes, well, he invented a new tier solely for the CMA. Like tier
CMA tier.
Yeah.
The CMA tier. But on a more serious note, we have a great question from Scott. He says, could Microsoft do anything to appeal if the CMA were to block the deal, i.e. some sort of legal appeal with another body?
So they can. Although it's very difficult, and I think when people say, they could do X, Y, and Z with the CMA, they don't quite understand how the CMA operates when they block something after phase 2, because usually if it's fairly rare that they would block something at phase 2, because what's more likely is that they would ask for undertakings, which is something they did, if you remember, at the end of phase 1, which is very common if it's going to progress to phase 2. Except Microsoft, didn't want to give them any undertakings, because how would they know exactly what the CMA wanted at that point in terms of an undertaking? So I guess if the CMA were to block at phase 2 and no undertakings were sorted out, nobody came to any agreement about that, then you can appeal to an independent competition authority in the UK, which is called the Competition Appeals Tribunal, called CAT. And the difficulty when you appeal to CAT is that CAT do not analyze the actual analysis of the CMA. So they wouldn't look to the merits of whether the CMA have blocked the case. What they actually look at is, has there been some procedural invalidation that the CMA have done? In other words, have they used their statutory powers in a way that's incorrect? Have they applied their statutory powers to review these mergers in a way that's incorrect, that's outside, ultra vires as it's called, so outside the scope of law? So it's not that the CAT would look at, okay, we're now going to take this away and analyse, have the CMA come to the right conclusion? They would take it away and gone, has the CMA applied its statutory powers correctly? And if it has, then that's the end of the road. Basically, in the UK, you cannot take anything else to court. It stops there. If CAT decided that there was something that's gone procedurally wrong, they don't overrule the CMA. All they do is remit it back to them to reanalyze it, to do the steps that they didn't do. And if the CMA then come to the same conclusion, that's it. It's done, So if the CMA then said, okay, well, sorry, we did this incorrectly, we're going to review again in the correct manner. We've reviewed again, the conclusion is exactly the same.
So it's basically a decision to re-review the entire thing. Got it.
Essentially. Yeah. So it's a little different in the UK compared to other jurisdictions.
There was another point there actually in the chat that I wanted to kind of bring up. He said, Please. And this is again, we might not know this question, and Luke, you might not either, because obviously you deal with the CMA of the UK. But if hypothetically the CMA is the only governing body that does not approve out of every governing body, what would
from
happen?
Ballantone, the comment, point? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, actually, because people don't have different views on this, and I can only speak from my experience with this sort of stuff. Typically, in a merger agreement, in an acquisition agreement, you will have what are called conditions precedent, and I'll get to the question, but I have to give the backstory first. And conditions precedent are, once you've signed the deal, once you've exchanged contracts, you have a bunch of conditions that you have to fulfill before you can complete the deal, right? So before you can say, right, now Activision Blizzard belongs to Microsoft, or they've merged. And one of the conditions that you see often in deals of this size, and it will definitely 100% be a condition of this deal, because they've already said that it is, and it's clear that it is the approval of regulators. And the way that's drafted, I don't know, because none of us know what that looks like. But usually it will either be very broad, so it will be, the approval of all regulators, conditional or unconditional, whatever. Or it might specifically say the approval of certain regulators is a conditions precedent to completing the deal. And, may have some wording about specific regulators in that regard. So if the CMA block a deal, it's possible that the deal collapses, right? Because if you cannot fulfill a condition precedent, you can't fulfill a deal. The deal just ends. You're not able to do it. And I've seen that before. It's fairly common in big deals. It may be that there are carve-outs in the contracts, in the merger agreement, between Activision and Microsoft, to say that even if a competition authority blocks the deal, that they could proceed, otherwise in particular markets. Obviously, they would have to significantly modify their behavior in the market that's blocked the deal. And it's really rare that deals say that. Because if you think about it, if you're Microsoft and Activision, what if the CMA block it and they will not accept any other undertakings and they're not happy, then what do you do in terms of one of your biggest gaming markets in the world? How does that work? The kind of efficiencies and advantages from this deal are going to be felt the most in markets like the UK, like EU, like America, right? So I don't buy, and some people have this rationale that they're like, well, you could just do this, you could geo-lock or do X, Y, and Z in a particular market if it blocks it. If you don't have a clause in your contract that says the deal fails if you don't satisfy a condition precedent, yes, you could do that, but would they want to? The answer is probably not. It's very unlikely that you would be willing to forego all the advantages in a massive market like the UK that Microsoft have done this deal for, just because the CMA blocked it and they really want to finish, they really want to complete the deal. So hopefully that's helps a little bit. And like I said, I mean, we don't know what the agreement says, so I can only say from experience, but I can absolutely 100% guarantee you that there's clearly a condition precedent about all of this stuff, and it's probably drafted fairly broadly so that if the CMA did block it and no undertakings were accepted and that was the end of the line, the deal would fall over. It happens, it has happened, and it'll continue to happen.
Okay. That's also interesting to know, because I was wondering exactly that as well. Given that Activision Blizzard is a company acting on a global scale, like they have studios everywhere, and that's why it has to go through all the different countries and their commissions and regulations. But yeah, how much of a power does a single country actually hold? This is very, very interesting stuff. One quick question from Safe Space Invader. He says, to put a decent decree on this deal seems odd. Any precedent?
I assume it means a consent decree, which, yes, I mean, there's lots of precedents for the FTC asking for consent decrees for certain mergers and acquisitions. In the UK, for the CMA, it's called an undertaking, which can be either behavioural or structural. So a behavioural undertaking is effectively a legal promise of, let's say, Microsoft in this case, to not do something for a period of time. And a structural one would be, for Microsoft to do something actually with the structure of Activision or themselves to alleviate competition concerns. So that might be, for example, plucking something out of there. They hive off Call of Duty for some reason to a different company, or do something like that. Obviously never happened, but so the CMA have asked for those before. I mean, obviously in gaming, I don't think we've ever had a deal. Well, we certainly never had a deal of this size. Jesus, this is a massive deal. And from recollection, I don't think we've ever had anything pass through competition authorities, apart from recently when we had Sony and Bungie, but that went through very easily with the authorities that
very similar, like
involved.
Bethesda.
Bethesda as well. Yeah. So, we've never had any deal of this size in the gaming sector where something has been, gone to phase 2 for the CMA, for example. So there isn't a precedent for it such, but there is a precedent for consent decrees or undertakings for very large scale mergers in tech and other industries like this one.
Interesting. Guys, again, you have the chance to ask Luke, our own mergers and acquisition lawyer here. So put them in the chat. We have over 100 people here watching. Again, welcome to everyone. I rarely ask for this, but of course, if you could do us a quick favor and just hit that like button, it just helps the algorithm and our little show here out. But most importantly, enjoy the show and drop your questions in the chat. I do have a question. Look, we've already covered now the CMA. Another big commission that has to approve the deal is the European Commission, obviously. Do you have any idea or experience in how this works? Now, given that Brazil approved the deal, is this somehow going to transfer over for the EU? Are they working closer together with the CMA? Do those two influence each other? How is the EU thing looking?
Yeah, so the EU are the Commission is very similar to the UK, and the reason for that is Brexit, because before Brexit, the UK's merger, the competition merger regime, was effectively the EU's, obviously, because EU directives and implementation of EU law in that manner on the UK. So actually, the EU also have a phase 1 investigation. They have a phase 2 investigation. Their timeline's a little different. So after I think, and here's where I really earn my money trying to remember this stuff. But I think the Commission have 25 working days after they've been notified of a phase 1 for phase 1 for their review of that. And most of the cases are resolved again, like the CMA in phase 1. They then have a phase 2 investigation, like the CMA. But I think their timeline is slightly more truncated. So I think it's about 90 working days or some random figure like that from memory. So it's not quite 24 weeks. And they can extend it as well. So the EU will be working very closely with the CMA on the basis that they always did work very closely, obviously, when they were, when the UK was part of the EU. And even then, the UK had a separate antitrust regime. Obviously, the CMA still approved things in its own right. But what you would see, and this is, I guess, the really interesting touch point, is that, 9.9 times out of 10, the CMA and the EU would be completely, joined in their approach and their rationale and their result effectively. Now it's a little bit different because the CMA have entire jurisdiction effectively to do whatever they want, and we don't know quite how that's going to continue to look. So they may be at odds with each other, but I would be fairly surprised if they were. I would be surprised if the EU didn't go to a phase 2 as well. But ultimately, I would still expect the deal to be approved.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So the phase 2 EU investigation has yet to be announced. We haven't heard anything about that. It will be interesting what it means for the timeline of the overall deal, but it kind of feels like with the CMA having the deadline on March 1st now, the EU might come or not, depending on how. I think, guys, it'll be a little longer than we originally thought. I want to read a super chat from Dave Ramos. He sends in $5. Thank you, man, so much for the support. He says, or asks, how much does Xbox keeping Minecraft, Fallout 76, and Elder Scrolls Online multiplat impact the scrutiny of Microsoft's statement on how they will treat Call of Duty in the future?
Yeah, I think personally, it will play a small part. It won't play a huge part, but they'll certainly be looking into the behaviors of the company and how they've tracked IPs previously, with regards previous transactions, and specifically when they're looking at Call of Duty, which is a main talking point, of course. But they also look at other aspects of it. Of course, notably, they'll be looking at the mobile section as well, which is one of the key points of the takeover, which people seem to overlook. Actually, the main purpose of the takeover was actually more to do with King and the mobile section and cloud tech than it was Call of Duty. That was just a byproduct of the deal. It was a nice cherry on top. But Yeah, absolutely. They'll look into it. They'll say, okay, well, Microsoft have reiterated their intentions with the initial draft up documents or documents that they've presented to us to keep Call of Duty as multiplat. I think it was the Microsoft CFO or someone very similar to that was mentioning that it would provide no financial benefit to Microsoft as a company to withdraw PlayStation from competing consoles. It wouldn't it would not benefit them to do so. So it would and those statements, no doubt, other than the fact that they've been publicly made, will have also been written in the document presented to the CMA and other regulators. Essentially, their intentions going forward for the company and the markets that they're operating in. So yeah, for absolutely, it'll be taken into as a factor. It won't be a kind of complete. Oh yeah, okay, they've said this, so of course we'll approve it, because obviously we know that's not how it works.
Yeah.
But they'll certainly take into account kind of historic behaviors and say, okay, well, if that is the case, and this is how they've tracked those previous IPs, such as Minecraft being the best one to show them, because of course that was originally the largest kind of gaming transaction. I think that had occurred at that point, which is over 2 billion, 2.5, I think it was total.
Yeah.
And that was for a singular game and company.
Yeah.
And that's only remained multiplat. And if not only just remained multiplat, but actually extended the amount of platforms it's on since it was acquired. So it went from just being PlayStation and Xbox and PC to being every form of kind of downloadable area on PC, Nintendo Switch, mobile, and all consoles going forward, and then newer versions of that game. So I think, of course, Microsoft in their documents will have put forward their intentions, and essentially that is part of the deal. Is what are the intentions of the company, and to do with this deal, what is the purpose of this transaction, and all of that will be detailed within the documents. And Luke will obviously be able to kind of indulge us about that a little bit more. But I'll hand it over to him, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it will have some influence, but I wouldn't think too much, because ultimately the competition regulators aren't concerned so much about past behavior but future behavior, because that's what they're analyzing. They're analyzing what will happen if this thing happens. So they will look at stuff like that. I think the difficulty Microsoft have in pointing to stuff like that is all of those games were already multi-platform. They already existed on other platforms when Microsoft made their acquisition. So it would have been really strange for Microsoft to pull them, given the build-up of communities. Whereas obviously future Call of Duties, who knows, right? Because they haven't come out yet. So, and we know obviously there's some contractual stuff where Sony are going to get those games anyway. But beyond that, beyond what Microsoft have offered, that's what competition regulators are looking at. So, but I don't think it's I don't think Microsoft's approach in the past is of, zero relevance to regulators, because it will be of some relevance. I just don't quite know how much that will be.
Yeah.
So from when I read the question from Dave, my immediate thought was like, I'm not sure if the fact that a Minecraft or Fallout 76 state multiplat plays a role. If I were to investigate that, I would much rather look at like, what were the statements that they made back then, and did they keep their public statements? So basically, are they telling the truth when they come out with their statements in the past? How does this factor in, Luke?
Yeah, well, I was going to say that's a really good point, because the one element that doesn't work in Microsoft's favor, and you're absolutely right, is the nature of what they've done since they've acquired Bethesda, which is to say, yes, they've kept all of those games multi-platform. They were already on multiple platforms, including PlayStation. So, they wouldn't have had any other choice, really.
Yeah.
But what have they done in terms of the roadmap of Bethesda games coming out, and what they've done is they've said, well, they're not coming to PlayStation. Starfield, some of the biggest IPs, right? So regulators won't look very kindly on that, because it's not as if Microsoft came out and said before they acquired Bethesda that these games are all still coming to PlayStation. They were very careful with their wording. But unfortunately for Microsoft, it sets a very limited precedent of what they might do in the future, albeit, in the future, at least with Call of Duty, they've been very, very adamant about keeping it on PlayStation for an unspecified amount of time, and they've been very adamant about how profitable it is on PlayStation, and how it would be silly to take it off. So it's a really good point.
Yeah. We have the question: does Luke think it will pass or not? I have also put that question in the chat with a poll. So guys, get in there and vote. I want to hear what is everyone's thought on the deal. Will it get approved? Yes, 100%. Yes, but with restrictions. Or no, it will fail. Let us know. We have 110 people here listening. It's almost, I think, a record. Dutch, Luke, you are a listener magnet. We have to get you on here more often, man.
Just keep those massive merger and acquisitions in the gaming space coming, really.
So
then you'll be fine.
I think we will give our thoughts whether it will pass or not at the very end of the topic. I want to read another question from Thanaros. What if the whole purpose of Jim Ryan going to the regulators is just to stall the approval?
I don't think it is. It's a good question. I don't think the whole well, it is. If you go into hypotheticals and conspiracy theories, because of course that would be along the lines of a potential conspiracy theory, at least. It wouldn't surprise me if an intention was, of course, we know this is going to pass. Like, realistically, there isn't much room for it to not pass. But what we can do is essentially kind of push it as far as we can to ensure, at least stick our noses in enough for it to postpone the kind of inevitable approval. So that we can kind of get a few of our things in order for going forward. So we know that they're working on live service games themselves. We know that they've got their own IPs and own catalogs and their own services, etc., that they're currently building and currently pushing going forward. So in a conspiracy theory way, possibly that might be a game plan from Sony to say, listen, we'll try and kind of essentially stick our noses and cause a little bit of a ruckus for this transaction to bide ourselves some time and let us kind of have as much time as possible to get our own house in order, to kind of ensure that when this does inevitably go through, we've kind of already got stuff essentially in place to protect ourselves. What about you, Luke? How do you see this conspiracy theory?
Oh, I don't deal well with conspiracy theories, I must say. No, I mean, I think this comes out of Jim Ryan going to the EU Commission, right, and talking to them about it. It's not uncommon for the Commission to invite interested parties to actually go and have, like, a cup of tea and some biscuits and talk about how it will impact them and their views on it. Some regulators do this differently. So the CMA has an open public consultation period where anybody really, anyway, any interested party can write to them and give submissions, which Sony no doubt would have done. The Commission is a bit more hands-on, so this does happen sometimes. I think people, and I get why, because it's pretty funny to think about. I think people imagine Jim like furiously calling the Commission, wanting to have a meeting, and trying to get the quickest plane to Brussels he can. But in reality, it's extremely likely that the EU invited him over. The Commission invited him over because obviously, who is this deal going to impact the most outside of Microsoft and Activision? obviously it's Sony. That's nobody can deny that. Did he go there to delay it? Well, no, because they're on their own statutory time frame. They have to do things in certain amounts of time. The commission, that is. But was he ever going to reject the opportunity to go and talk about it? Absolutely not. No way. He's got his own fiduciary duty to Sony as a director to act in the best interest of the company, and he has to go and make a case for why he thinks this is bad. Of course he does. Just like if the roles were reversed and Sony were the one buying Activision, you can bet Phil Spencer would be first class business class on his way to Brussels to talk about it, right? So I think it's a funny image, but I don't think in reality that's how it works. Well, I know that's not how it works, but
it's funny you said it like that, because I said, honestly, I would be a little worried if he didn't try to obviously intervene. That's his job. To me, what is so weird about this whole thing is how he went public with it and almost took it to a personal level when he came out and said things like, and I'm paraphrasing now, like, I thought we keep this in between us, but since Phil Spencer mentioned it publicly, it's almost like a personal attack. And that is so weird to me, because if we remember the good old days during the PS4 era, where we had like Sean Layden and Reggie Phil Amy come up together with Phil Spencer on stage. This is kind of hard to imagine that something like that is gonna happen now. I feel like even if the official terms are still, we're close partners with Sony and the good friends from Sony and so on, I feel like that not the fact that they obviously try to somehow talk against that in front of the FTC or the EU or the CMA, but the fact that they do it so publicly, I think this is something that really hurts, like on a personal level, in between the CEOs, and that's what is so weird to me.
The one thing I found a little bit strange about that as well is primarily it's Jim Ryan himself feels so disconnected from the actual space. He is, out of all of them, including Doug Bowser and Phil Spencer, both of those are very intertwined with the gaming space. I mean, Doug Bowser, it's hilarious. I still laugh at that every time. The fact that they keep getting these people that are named after Mario, like Nintendo IPs every time. But it's they feel far more integrated with the ethos of the platform, much like Sean Layden did. When he was in charge, he felt like he was a gamer. He felt like he came across like he was very interested in everything that Sony had to offer in the games, and he was very enthusiastic. And Jim Ryan is the complete opposite of that. It comes across like a cardboard corporate CEO, whose only real role is the financial benefit of Sony, and not really how good these games are. He doesn't seem too interested in it, and it comes across in his mentality when he's coming out, because essentially what Phil was doing and what Xbox were doing with regards to the transparency and how they presented things was the public concern was that Call of Duty the overall public concern was that Call of Duty would end up exclusive. So Microsoft have come out, and as they have been throughout the entirety of Phil Spencer's reign as leader of Xbox, and being transparent about their intentions going forward to the public. This wasn't directly aimed at Sony. This was merely Xbox saying, listen, we know what you're thinking. This is our plan for Call of Duty going forward. We don't have any intentions of removing it. If anything, we want to get it to more places. So for some reason, and again, we can only speculate on this, but for some reason, Jim Ryan took that as a personal attack on Sony and thought it was directed based on private discussions they've had, which it wouldn't have been. It would have been primarily on the public concern, which is what Xbox usually do, is put out these statements. And we've seen that with both Bethesda. We've seen it with Activision Blizzard, of course, now. And we've seen it kind of on numerous things. They put out statements when public concern, and they very noticeably put out statements about everything, whether that be Xbox Live Gold price increase, which turned around and they put out a statement to say we made a mistake, we've reversed it, etc., etc. And we've only ever seen Sony do that once. And they put out a statement as well and reversed it, and that was the Horizon Forbidden West upgrade fee, which they stopped, and kind of ensured people could upgrade for no cost. But it's so, I agree with you.
But they only did it for that particular game, not in general. And the thing is, you're spot on. I mean, with Jim Ryan, it all feels like business. While when we had the Sean Layden days, we had like the passion for games came through, and I mentioned that yesterday on the Midweek Mix-Up podcast as well, that they put out like this roadmap for PlayStation games, and they told you, okay, if you invest during the PS4 era, so in 2015, they said, now, if you invest now, eventually you will get a Spider-Man game. You will play a game like Days Gone. God of War is making its return. Death Stranding is coming. And you had like this excitement, this exciting roadmap ahead. It doesn't feel like that right now. In addition to that, we had all the poor communication. We had the price increase, and all these things combined. And it is just my speculation, but knowing that over the last year, the stock dropped significantly for Sony, and it is the PlayStation division is the biggest part of Sony. It makes up, depending on the year, around about 70% of their entire revenue coming from the PlayStation division. So if the stock drops from Sony, it kind of puts Jim under the pressure, and it feels like a lot of the moves they are doing lately is like to generate short-term revenue, like increase console prices, increase game prices, stuff like that, charging the next gen tax or whatever. These are all measures that will generate you revenue on a short-term basis. The thing is, it can definitely hurt your brand in the long run, for multiple reasons.
I think personally as well, with you saying that as well, with regards to the actions they're taking, I think depending on what you see from the stock market and from shareholders, those actions that you take could also have a negative impact. Even increasing console prices depending on the scenario and the time, can have a negative impact on the share price going forward. So some of the moves that they are making, whilst they're doing it for the financial benefit of the company, from a shareholder and stock perspective, of course, we've seen the smallest of even rumors can alter a stock price of certain moves and transactions. So if you're going to do something and put that into practice, that could have a negative impact. As much as you're going to make a short-term gain on financials, the actual decision itself could actually negatively impact the stock price. So they've got to be very careful as to how they operate with certain things, because as much as you mentioned, these short-term financial gains, long-term effect is that it could have much dire consequences if they're not careful on how they continue to operate.
Indeed. Yeah, man, we could go on with that discussion for a long time. We actually have a couple of other topics we would like to discuss. So, guys, before we move on from the Activision Blizzard topic, I definitely want to encourage you to drop in your final questions for Luke. And in the meantime, let's see what does the community think. I'm going to close the poll in the chat. We have ask the question, will the deal go through? 75% said yes. 25% said yes, but with restrictions, and no one actually thinks that this is gonna fail. So, guys, I want to know from you. Do you think the deal will eventually go through? Luke, let's hear it.
Yeah. It's a spicy question, that one. It's a difficult one, isn't it? Yes. I do think it will go through. I think it's it's a really big deal, and it was always going to be heavily scrutinized, and it was always going to, I think, elicit some concern from regulators about whether it would be anti-competitive in any way or impact consumers in a detrimental way. So none of that's surprising, and I want to really stress this because this is something that I see online a lot, and it really winds me up. There will probably be more regulators that have issues with this. I would be shocked if the EU didn't go to a phase 2, for example, and they will talk about the concerns that they have. These regulators are not on Sony's side. They're not working for Sony, and they are analyzing the merger from their own perspective and their own documents. It's very arrogant of people to think that gaming is so pervasive through society that it is capable of influencing, regulatory competitive bodies that do this for a living. They are doing many other merger analysis as we speak, not just on Microsoft and Activision. And to be honest, they don't really care about Microsoft and Activision that much in comparison to any other merger that they're doing. So be prepared for more issues to come out, with more regulators to be tetchy about this stuff. Commission in particular, the FTC probably will be to some extent. But I do expect it to go through. I don't know whether it will go through with some, consent decree or undertaking needed. That's very difficult to predict. If I was guessing, I'd say I think it's unlikely, but you just never know, right? You don't know. These are people, these are groups of people analyzing information, and they can come to wildly different conclusions about what they think is right or what's wrong. So that's my view.
Very good for you. Dutch, how about you?
Yeah, I'm pretty much on the same stroke as Luke. I think it's going to go through. I think again, I also think it's going to be very unlikely that there's going to be any conditions set. The one thing I did, like I said, I did like to highlight it, and it also begs to differ as to how many other regulatory authorities might be rubbed up the wrong way, depending on how Sony have had these discussions in person with them, because some of the wording that Cade used specifically in their documents seems to be like they might have been rubbed up the wrong way by the language that Sony used. Specifically saying like our job isn't to protect you, essentially it's to protect the consumer. That seems like it is directed at Sony specifically, which begs to differ as to, of course, how are Sony speaking to these regulatory bodies, and are they kind of essentially trying to stamp authority on these regulatory bodies in these discussions? And if you're rubbing these guys up the wrong way, it could very well backfire. I mean, I don't know about Luke might be able to elaborate on that, but of course, if you're in these kind of legal discussions with anybody, winding them up the wrong way could have negative effects on them, and that seemed to be what Cade was kind of alluding to there. That potential, some of the wording that Sony might have used in these face-to-face discussions that they were invited for. Of course, like you mentioned, these kind of uninformal/informal discussions about how it affects them. Whatever wording they used could have been a little bit more strong, and Cade didn't like the wording or at least the way that they put themselves across, to the point where they kind of assumed that they were there to protect them and not the consumer. But overall, my overall thought is this will go through. Yes, it's going to. Of course, it's the size of the transaction warrants the in-depth scrutiny.
Obviously,
100%. Like I say, the only one we know of similar size that was of I wouldn't even say of similar size, but of similar competition issues was that Nvidia ARM deal, but that was too obvious. That was far too obvious to even think that would be approved. It was strange to see them attempt to try and do that merger because, of course, the market share was $2,000. 40 grand for that one to even get past that stage. But
yeah.
no,
I mean, you bring up a lot of good points. You're absolutely right, and I will give my thoughts in a second. I just want to say a big thank you to Master Clowns. He sends in a $20 super chat without saying anything. Man, really appreciate the support. Thank you so much. We're actually saving.
Something though. Feel free to say something if you're
absolutely. Absolutely. By the way, we are actually saving a couple of these super chats for a big giveaway. You guys know the holiday season is coming, and that means a lot of games come out, and people want to buy games, and that's why we are giving away a couple of gift cards for Xbox or PlayStation. It depends on you. We're gonna do that very soon, so that you all can play the awesome games that will come out over the next couple of months. And Master Clowns just follows up with a comment, and he says, "Thank you, König." Thank you, man. Really, really appreciate it. And he drops in another $20. Awesome, man. Thank you so much. Really, really, really means a lot. Thank you. So, yeah, what do I think? Of course, I think the deal will go through, honestly. But the thing is, I have the feeling that especially when we hear from the CMA in their final statement or from the EU, that we will hear maybe some restrictions. And the reason is actually maybe not related directly to the gaming space per se. But if we look at the tech industry, and I followed the technology in the tech industry very closely for years, not just the gaming space, the thing is that Europe has become very, well, I want to say, for the lack of better wording, say afraid of these giant tech companies like a Google, like an Amazon, like a Microsoft, like an Apple. And any acquisition that comes through that tries to grow the influence of these companies on society in general, let's put it that way, is getting investigated very carefully. We've seen it with so many other acquisitions, and that's why I have the feeling that a CMA went actually into a phase 2. It's just because it's Microsoft. It's one of the with Apple, the biggest company in the world. And then they are trying to grow with one of the biggest mergers and acquisitions, period. There weren't that many deals in general that had the scope of this one. So obviously, this is going to get investigated in depth. I'm really not surprised about that. But will it go through? Yeah, I think so, because if we look realistically, I can stand behind everything that the Brazilian regulatory Kate said. This deal, it will shift market shares, but it will not even closely be a monopoly or anything that harms competition. On the contrary, like Satya Nadella said a few weeks ago, let us have competition. And I feel, for the reasons said earlier, that Sony really needs a little competition. But yeah, with that, I want to actually transition over to another topic. And we stay on PlayStation because we had a couple in a big interview this week with Herman Holst from Sony, and a couple of interesting statements came out. We have learned in that interview that Sony is gonna bring certain games day and date to PC in the future, especially live service titles. And we know that they have announced that they work on at least 10 live service games that will come out over the next 5 years. They also said that PlayStation games, the single player games, will at least wait a year before they hit PC. Also very interesting because the time length in between release on console and PC is getting closer and closer, and we're not talking 2-3 years now, we're talking 1 year now. This was one big thing that came out of this this interview. We also learned that the live service push from Sony doesn't mean that they are leaving the single player games behind. And they also announced that they are heavily looking into further investments to support its PC and mobile push. So, gentlemen, I want to hear from you guys. What do you make of these statements? Dutch, this time I'm going to go first to you.
Okay. I mean, first of all, the one thing I did notice is it was a very reminiscent backdrop to what Phil Spencer usually is. It's his shelf full of goodies. So,
yeah, indeed,
that was good to see. But no, one thing I've reiterated since Herman took over was he's far better being the face of Sony PlayStation than Jim Ryan is. I think Jim Ryan needs to take a back seat and do more what Satya does and only really get involved as and when needs be at the very most. He is kind of the big dog, as it were, Jim Ryan, but we have the faces. Of course, Phil Spencer was the face of Xbox. We know that is now kind of falling on more Sarah Bond, whilst Phil Spencer kind of takes on much more seniority. But of course, that doesn't mean he's not in the limelight, because of course he still appears from time to time. But yeah, it's great to see Herman there. I think Herman's probably the better option going forward for them, first and foremost. He's a lot more integrated with the studios, having been the head of one of the studios primarily. Of course, the Guerrilla Games, and now moving up to being in charge of essentially
first-party studios. He's head of Sony first-party studios, yeah.
Yeah, the AAA segment, at least anyway. Of course, we know Yoshi's in charge of the indies. But yes, it's great to hear him speak. In terms of the time frame, I think I briefly spoke about this last night as well. The time frame is getting shorter and shorter. I would not be remiss in thinking that come next year or the year after, that time frame shrinks further to 6 months. One other additional thing that he mentioned here was that, and you didn't touch on it, but I will highlight it. He mentioned with regards cross-generation games will remain in place for a much further period of time.
I skipped that. Yeah,
that's a big one, because of course it's a case-by-case basis, but we will continue to make cross-generational games. Now, when you think about the first-party titles coming from PlayStation that we know of so far, does that directly mean Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine? And if so, that further harms, of course, PlayStation 5 going forwards, because a lot of people that do not have the money to invest in a PlayStation 5 now, listening to that, potentially don't need to worry about that now. And of course, when you're looking at it from a purely financial perspective on Jim Ryan's front, not shipping consoles, granted, both PlayStation 5 and Series consoles are doing better than last generation. In some cases, better than any.
The life-to-date sales are both higher than in every other previous generation. So,
but how does this affect them in the long run? Essentially, is what I'm kind of alluding to there. It's a strange thing to say. Of course, Xbox have been pretty firm on their cross-generational approach. They said 1 to 2 years. We know next year is essentially the first year without cross-generational support for games going forward. It will be cloud, Series consoles, or PC only. And that's it. And PlayStation's approach now is we're continuing to do cross-generational support for case-by-case basis. So we'll see how that pans out. PC,
Hang on 1 second. I need to jump in because I have to thank Master Clowns, who is continuing to drop super chat after super chat here. He sent in 2 times $20. Thank you so much, man. it's incredible. I don't think we're worth it, but man, really appreciate it. So yeah, just wanted to put that out. Thank you so much for the support.
It's a worthy interruption. We'll take that all day long. Thank you very much for the support, Master Clarence. But no, in terms of first party as well, going to PC for games as a service day and date makes absolute sense. With the games as a service games, you want that everywhere immediately. With it being games as a service, it's built to generate revenue consistently across its entire lifespan. Obviously, what that means, they will be implementing microtransactions, something that Sony aren't accustomed to. Thankfully, they're working with Bungie in order to discuss how to implement that correctly. I would like to see as well, Bungie do know how to do the microtransactional section of their game very well. With regards to the silver you can buy, and most of it is cosmetics or things like that. So it's not something that harms gameplay overall. So if that's the approach they're going for with their games as a service games, then fingers crossed it works for them. Of course, I hope they take precedent with designing their games of some of the approaches not to do, and we have to look at the method in which Halo Infinite has been rolled out. That is not how to do a games as a service game. And no doubt they'll be looking at operational benefits of certain games as a service titles to see what has worked and what hasn't, and how to implement these going forward. Not just what Bungie have done, but the wider market. So the day and date on that makes absolute sense. First party, a year, shrank down from what was originally 2 to 3 years to a year. So PC gamers are going to be over the moon with that initially. But I do foresee that coming down to 6 months in probably about 2 years, within 2 years. But yeah, it's
we will eventually get to day and date on PC. I have no doubt about that. Again, another shout out to Master Clowns. It is incredible. Luke, what do you make of this interview with Herman Holst? Live service games coming day and date, single players a year apart, cross-gen, and a bigger push into acquisitions to grow PC and the mobile space. So, what do you think of these announcements?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's that surprising, really. They've been trending towards more and more PC support all the time. It makes sense. They've made a lot of money from it on their current path. If you look at PC sales of stuff like Horizon Zero Dawn and Spider-Man, that's obviously still selling. God of War, like even Days Gone, all really successful for them on PC. So I think them truncating that period between PlayStation release and PC release, and that getting smaller, that was kind of inevitable to some extent after they started seeing the success they were getting on PC. It was always going to be a bit of a slower process for Sony because, I think when Microsoft adopted this, and particularly in Game Pass, they kind of didn't really have any other choice because, they didn't really have a big first party and they weren't doing, particularly well in terms of their first party sales, apart from 1 or 2 titles. So it made sense for them to just go all in, right, with their new strategy and just start dropping everything day and date. With Sony, I think they're still, they're trying to really work it out. Like, they don't want to spook people, I guess. They don't want to spook PlayStation customers. They don't want them to feel second class, even though they would, of course they wouldn't be second class from releasing it on PC day and date. But I think that's their concern, right? They don't want to upset the kind of equilibrium that exists now, but they do want to get that kind of that day and date difference to be smaller, because I think they probably anticipate that it won't cause any issues in terms of PlayStation sales, which is a big thing for them. And then with the service games, it just makes, you'd be silly not to release those day and date on PlayStation and PC, because
these games just rely on a large player base. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that's what they rely on. That's how they live or die. So if you isolate them to one platform, you're in a position where you're not giving the game the best advantage it could have at being a successful live service game, right? So no surprises at all there, and it'd be interesting to see what those games are. Obviously, it's some of them are closer than others. I think maybe something like Factions 2 is the closest thing, but who knows? And then otherwise, everything that you said was pretty par for the course. I mean, I do agree that the PlayStation 4 comment was a little bit weird in terms of, maybe we'll consider games on a case-by-case basis. They're in a bit of a difficult... I think that was just Herman Holst hedging his bets a little bit and not wanting to publicly commit to anything to the contrary. Because if you look at their sales now, they're really ramping up production and they're getting to a place, I think, where they can have lots of consoles on shelves in terms of PlayStation 5s. So, you want exclusive games on that platform and not on PlayStation 4 for two reasons. Yeah. One, to drive adoption of the console, but also to further, the game development in general, right? Because you want them to take advantage of all this stuff properly. I could see maybe some PlayStation 4 stuff for some of their service games, perhaps, because you've got a big base of people to get invested in that. So I think that's the more likely area. I think they will try, and again, I'm not Mystic Meg, so I don't know, but I think they'll try and keep their big blockbuster titles, single player titles on PlayStation 5. But who knows what the manufacturing cadence will be for their consoles going forward. It is looking a lot better. I think they expect it to be a lot better in the future.
I'm not even sure if it's just the manufacturing issues, because eventually it looks like these pipelines are getting better filled now. Honestly, I think like if you think as a CEO of such a big company, you also look at the global economics, and you just see that the world is on the brink of a recession. You have actually no idea where is the global economy in a year. Yeah, when we talk holiday 23, where will we be? Will we go into a deep recession? And the first thing people will sacrifice if they have to choose in between food and gaming, it's obviously gaming. But if you have that console already at home, it's also something you kind of have to factor in. So I'm not sure if it's just driven by console availability and chip availability on a global scale. I think other factors come in there as well. And besides that, there might be a simple technical reason. If you bring your games to PC anyway, the question really is always, what is the minimum spec on PC? So if you are able to run that game anyway, because you have that slider in the game to reduce level of detail, resolution, you name it, frame rates, and so on. If you have that anyway, well, why not release one of that versions as well on PC? So and we have another super chat from our super generous friend Master Clown. I can't believe what you're doing here, man. Stop it. Right. Really appreciate the support, but you gotta.
I feel like I need to dance something soon. I feel like.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, good talk about the interview, guys. I also want to briefly touch because we're already almost closing on the 2-hour mark, man. But yeah, great discussions. Time flies. It's just what it is. But I have a couple of things I want to discuss. One thing is about the game we are seeing right now. Or the IP that we are seeing right now. And that is, of course, The Witcher. CD Projekt Red had an investor call. And I have to admit, usually those investor calls don't get me that excited, because they are investor calls. And if I'm not an investor, why would I care usually? But this time, there were so many news drops that got me so excited. So CD Projekt Red has announced they are officially working on a Cyberpunk sequel, which is very cool to see that they are not abandoning that IP after the rocky launch. I mean, it was still a commercial success. They also announced they sold more than 20 million copies already, but 65 million copies of The Witcher 3 were sold globally since its release. So they announced that the Witcher game that they announced earlier this year is the start of a new trilogy. That trilogy will come out within a 6-year span from the first game coming out, 3 years later the second, and another 3 years later they will have the third in the trilogy. They also announced 2 other games. One is outsourced to another studio and is basically a spin-off single-player RPG, and the other one is also outsourced, but it is gonna be a multiplayer take in the Witcher universe. In addition to that, they announced that they are working on another game in the main studio, which is a complete new IP. So a lot of good stuff coming from CD Projekt Red, and everyone knows how much I love The Witcher. The only caveat to this announcement was that we still don't know about the release date for the next gen patch for The Witcher 3. But other than that, I'm super excited. We're getting an entire new Witcher trilogy made in Unreal 5. We learned that earlier this year. It will release within a time span of 6 years apart from first to third, which is awesome to hear. We get a couple of spin-off games as well, a multiplayer game in that universe. Cyberpunk is going to return, and a new IP, and I want to hear your excitement, Luke. Are you excited for these games announcements? What do you expect from them? What did you make of this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, at least in terms of The Witcher. Witcher 3, one of my favorite games of all time. Absolutely loved it. Also really loved Witcher 2, actually, as well. But so I'm super, super excited for more Witcher, and I think it's great that they've committed to a new trilogy. There are so many places you can go in that universe. Obviously, outside of Geralt, his story's done. But yeah, and it just makes. I mean, it's a no-brainer for them because they've effectively, with the games and then also the success of the Netflix show, they've turned the series. And I know, obviously, Sapkowski's novels were popular, but they've turned it into this huge kind of mega fantasy brand, on the level of Game of Thrones, something like that. It's not quite that level, but it's not far away. And I'm glad that they're committing to more games, right? And I think I don't think their release schedule is particularly ambitious. Like, I know some people were like, how will they do that? But release one game and then 3 years apiece development for a second game and a third game. I mean, it's very doable. It's going to be an Unreal Engine 5. I'm looking forward to the comments of it being, the second in the trilogy being DLC or something like that. Even though it looks very similar. But it's great. And I mean, I think the spin-off games are cool as well. I think one of them was from the Fire and the Flood indie developer, so I'm looking forward to seeing what that will be. And I think the other one, as you say, was an RPG spin-off, and I think the studio that's making it is actually made up of a bunch of people who made some of the Witcher games. Yeah. So, again, it makes sense. They're just outsourcing it to basically CDPR 2, like a smaller version. So that's cool. Cyberpunk's a really interesting one for me because I've played like 30 hours of that game and I still don't know what I think about it. So, and I keep going back to it and something pulls me back, and then I remember, I don't really like this bit of it. And then I'm like, actually, this is really cool. So I will finish it this year, and then I will finally think about what I feel about that game. I was really hyped for it, and it was disappointing at launch for me. And I played it, on PC on a 3080, ray trace DLSS, the best version of that game. And I don't know what I feel about it. I certainly feel that there's a lot of cool stuff in there, but I don't feel like it lived up to my own expectations. Maybe that's my problem. But I am really, I think they've got a lot to prove, CDPR, after Cyberpunk. And I think that's exciting because you can tell by the way they talked about a Cyberpunk sequel that they recognized that it wasn't everything that they wanted it to be. And that was really their own fault. You know, I think it was kind of an admission that we didn't get that right. And so if they can actually deliver upon the vision that they had for the original Cyberpunk for a sequel, I think that will be an incredible game. Who knows when it'll come out, but I'm also
it's gonna be a while.
Yeah, it's gonna be a long time.
Yeah.
And I'm looking forward to the DLC as well, which looks really ambitious.
Yes.
And also looking forward to this new ray tracing patch. I think I'm gonna get 4090, so I'm gonna really
a 4090 guy. 4090 guy.
Yes,
I'm gonna stick with my 3080 for now.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping the 4090 will actually heat my flat, so that's the intention. That's kind of the second intention.
Well, my 3080 already does that, so I'm really good with
it. Yeah. So I'm that's my intention. But yeah, I think what they announced is really cool, and I think last point, and then I'll give up on it. But I really like when gaming companies are so transparent about what they're making and the kind of rough time frames. I think that's really cool. They have to be transparent in some respects, and you see that a lot more now because they want developers, you know, they want people to join them, and it's a bit of a job pitch more than anything. But it's great when they're like, here is everything we're working on for the next 10, 15 years. You know,
absolutely.
Look forward to it. That's great because you're like, oh, awesome. What? Because often I think, why does it have to be a secret that they're going to make a Cyberpunk sequel, or you know, why is it a secret what Insomniac are making? Like, and not that they're doing that, but
100%.
I just don't get it. The film industry does not do this anymore. The film industry tells you, you know, exactly what they're
very
making.
Very clear. This is the roadmap, and in 2 years you will see that Avengers movie and this Marvel movie, and stuff like.
It's being signed off on, and they're just like, there you go.
They're just like, here it is. It's years away, but like, here it is. You know,
and over the years, you can excite people because you can show, I don't know, concept art or screenshot or tease or here or there, and it's just helps. I have to thank again Master Clouds. You stop it, man.
Boston Burger.
Then it's we're gonna give this super chat right back to the community, guys. We're doing a giveaway. I'll add another $5, and then we have the $25 or euro gift card. I need someone from the US to help me out with a gift card if someone from the US is gonna win. You guys know the drill by now, how we do giveaways on this show. We have this little tool. So just type into the chat #Witcher, no capital letters, all small, #Witcher, and we're gonna let our tool run through the comment sections to pick out someone, a lucky winner.
Dave Ramos is your glamorous USA assistant today.
Ooh, sweet, awesome. Because I can only buy like European codes. So it's always difficult for me, and if someone from Australia or New Zealand wins, I'm gonna need some help there as well. So we're gonna do that giveaway right away. Type in #Witcher, and Dave Ramos actually sends in also a super for being a member for 16 months now. An incredible amount of time, man. He says he can't wait for The Witcher in full fat Gen 9 greatness. Yeah, man. We will definitely play that on the next gen consoles. Yeah, guys. Exactly. In chat, you have to put in #Witcher, not just Witcher. That's not enough. The tool won't pick it up. We're gonna give you another minute or two. Dutch, let us hear your excitement real quick before we draw our lucky winner here.
Definitely. Yeah, #Witcher, everybody. Yes, for me personally, the one thing I loved about the CDPR roadmap was, well, obviously not only that was an investor call essentially, but it was a public investor call. So it was, okay, this is what we're doing. This is our plans going forward, not just on the gaming front, but as a company. And this is what our sole focuses are going to be as a company going forward or henceforth. The one thing I liked most about it was their directness on, okay, we are only, as a company, going to dedicate ourselves to 3 major franchises going forward. That is going to be the Witcher franchise, the Cyberpunk franchise, and our new IP. Those are going to be our stable franchises, and that's what we're focusing on. For those stable franchises, we're going to allow, essentially work with other companies in order to kind of make little offshoots, or maybe it's a little mobile game here, or comics, or TV series, or movies, or whatever it may be. But essentially, we're focusing and just focusing all our attention on just these franchises to allow them to really elaborate further on these worlds and to how great they can be. I think one thing that can kill some studios is doing too much of everything and not being masters of one. And I think the one thing which is apparent from CDPR is that they want to be the masters of one thing, and that is Western RPGs. We will see, of course, what the new IP is going to be, but it would not surprise me if it was another Western RPG set in a different universe. And of course, just boil down on being masters of that. And of course, instead of just trying to do many things good, doing one thing amazing is kind of a great focus to have. I'm really hyped for. I love The Witcher. I've played many hours of it, nowhere near as many hours as Boxy, who's finished it 404 times now.
Yeah. Guilty as charged.
But other than that, yeah, it's I do enjoy it. I am intentionally, because I got to a stage a long time ago. I haven't actually finished The Witcher yet. I got very far into it, put it down, and then by the time I went back to it, I completely lost how to play the game, make potions, make craftings, combat. I'd lost my way. Started it again. When I started again, I was like, yeah, the next gen's round the corner. I'm just gonna wait and get the next gen patch, which was hinted at, and of course never got it. So it's been on the back burner, and I will be jumping into it when the next gen patch drops and we get that glorious update with ray tracing, etc. But the big one for me was definitely Cyberpunk. When that came out, that was one I was really looking forward to. Thankfully for me, and I've mentioned this on numerous occasions now, thankfully for me, I didn't have any major flaws with the game. One thing I did benefit from was that other than seeing kind of the gameplay footage that they'd shown, I didn't pay attention to all the things that they'd said in the background about their hopes and dreams for the game. I just knew the premise of it. I knew the setting. I knew the gameplay I'd seen, the story trailers and things I'd seen, and I liked what I saw. And based my kind of initial impressions on that before playing it, as opposed to looking into what it was about and kind of digging deep into what they wanted the game to be. So I know there was certain things that they wanted from Cyberpunk, such as like this really interactive kind of police situation where there would be kind of these kind of really in-depth police chases, and it would be carnage and things, and that never come to fruition. And I know that was a big letdown for a lot of people. That was something that they said just didn't take place and they'd promised. I've got no doubt, like Luke says, going forward, based on their thing, is they want to fully realize their original ambitions for that.
Absolutely.
And of course, I think one of the key things they'll take from this is do not restrict yourself to previous hardware. If the next Cyberpunk needs to be on the next generation, whatever that may be, only, then just do that. And it could be that, depending on how The Witcher rolls out, that it won't be till the next generation that we see the next Cyberpunk. It wouldn't surprise us.
I would assume so. Honestly, like we are realistically looking here at a 6-year cycle or so, and that is probably the next.
You know what it is? That it's a good 12 to 14-year roadmap at least.
Yes.
Which is awesome. We don't normally see something that long.
Yeah, true.
And again, another thing that we're all hyped for is, and again, it's the first stage on the major Cyberpunk revitalization is Phantom Liberty's release next year, which is next gen only.
Yeah.
That is the best move they could have made for that DLC, in my opinion. This is what this title can do without being restricted by the previous.
Yeah.
So this is really a good example as to how we can see this universe going forward. So as long as this knocks it out the park, Phantom Liberty, and from what we've seen, it's very intriguing. It's a brand new story. Not really interlinked with anything previously. It's more like it seems to me more like kind of a Blade Runner situation, like you're part of the like the police or something along those lines, or a detective. So very intriguing. But yeah, overall, major props to them. I think, and you might not have seen as well as other news, the CEO has stepped down.
Stepped down after 22 years or so. Yeah. He was actually one of the co-founders of CD Projekt Red. Yeah.
Advisory role now. He's just on the board, I think, now, and out of the way of the leadership. So big changes for them going forward. I personally think that they've learned. I think they have learned their lesson from the backlash they got from that. I think it might have been yourself that mentioned this on Wednesday. Actually, the media darlings, they were beforehand. They couldn't do wrong because of how good The Witcher was and how well that was received, and all of the DLCs that they put out that were ginormous, and the value people got for the content that was released was unprecedented. Essentially, like you're talking 30, 40 hour expansions to an already 100+ hour game for like $15-$20. Like that's insane value for money. So
Indeed.
Coming off that, to have the horrendous launch that they did on Cyberpunk was a huge crash down to earth. But we know now as well that it was developers saying do not release this. It is not ready. We are not ready. And the shareholders going, tough. It's going.
Indeed.
Yeah. So I think they've learned. I think they've learned from that lesson. And
for sure.
They'll be really
on
careful
Cyberpunk and The Witcher. You will probably see a way different way how they will handle the launches, and it's gonna be a lot more polished.
I've got to say, hats off to them as well, because they are without doubt the reigning kings of generating the biggest turnarounds ever with hit TV series on both games. There is no other game that I've seen be able to capitalize to this extent.
True.
Through TV series. Edge Runners has been phenomenally received. I mean, if you have a look at Rotten Tomatoes, it's almost 100%.
The player base spiked because of it. It was insane to see. Yeah.
It's so hats off to them. It was a really interesting story, actually, even for those fans of anime. And it ties in really well with the universe. And likely we're also in December getting the Witcher spin-off series, the limited series, before the new one comes in next year. So that's going to have another 2 spikes in sales, no doubt. So yeah, hats off. Big work from CDPR. And fingers crossed they can get back to winning ways again, because the work that they do when they do actually get the job done is rightfully second to none. It is absolutely tremendous.
Perfect segue to our giveaway. Last chance, type in #Witcher. I do hope the tool works now properly. Just a few more seconds, and then we will draw the lucky winner of a $25 or Euro gift card.
#Witcher, everybody.
#Witcher, no capital letters, just like it's displayed here on the tool. I'm already sharing my tab from the tool, and then we gonna do the giveaway in 3, 2, 1, and let's start collecting. The lucky winner is gonna be Jargasm. Congratulations, man. Congratulations. If you could do me a favor, just hit me up on Twitter. We're gonna get in touch with me through Twitter, and then we'll forward you that. Congratulations, man, and big congrats, and thanks to Master Clowns. He's been sponsoring that here in today's
World of Gaming this week, sponsored by Master Clown.
Yeah, exactly. All right. How can we bring back the Witcher footage here? Yeah, man. Chagasm, get in contact with me if for some reason Twitter doesn't work for you. You can find in the channel description, on the YouTube channel description, also my email. That of course will also work. So we can get you the code. All right, guys. Good chat. Luke, how is your timeline? Do you have another 15-20 minutes? Because we have the community section at the end of the show, and this week we have a couple of very cool questions. So you good?
Yeah,
for another?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
awesome. Awesome. Then let's get to the community questions. All right, you know the drill. Each and every Wednesday, you can write in your questions on Twitter or on YouTube here, or where some people actually sent me also questions through Xbox Live or PlayStation Network. It doesn't matter. Just send the questions over, because sometimes it can happen that you guys won't be able to watch live and still want to be part of the show, or just you have a great question in mind, a great topic in mind that you want us to discuss, and that is what the community questions are for. And we have a couple of cool ones coming. The first one comes from Amblix. He says on the 21st of this month, we have Scorn and Persona coming out on Game Pass, as well as the Modern Warfare 2 campaign and Gotham Knights releasing on the same day. Which of these will you be playing first in a couple of weeks, and why did you go with it over the others? So I got my answer ready. If you need to think, and it's obviously gonna be Gotham Knights. I'm super excited for that game. I just love the Batman universe in its entirety. This week, the previews came out, and it previewed really well. Combat is apparently very fluid. It's not trying to be an Arkham game. That's what basically every previewer said. It's not trying to be an Arkham game, but it is trying to be a cool open world action RPG. And the combat is good. Story, people couldn't really tell about the story because the part they played was too small to touch on story elements, but I'm excited for that. Persona 5 isn't for me. I'm gonna try out Scorn, of course, but I'm not in a hurry to try it, honestly. And Call of Duty, well, I'm not a big multiplayer Call of Duty guy. I usually buy the Call of Duty games in a sale to play the single player campaigns. So yeah, for me, it's definitely Gotham Knights. What about you guys?
For me, to be fair, there's a lot of games that I want to play, and I'm excited for coming up. And that's the problem. That's the big problem. So for me, I've got multiple. So after playing the Call of Duty beta and having fun with the guys as well, and I'll be picking Call of Duty up at the end of the month. Scorn, I'll be definitely diving into, specifically on the fact that I know that's going to be between 6 to 8 hours. So it's not going to be an uber long experience anyway, which is good, especially with my attention span at times. High on Life, really looking forward to that. Can't wait for that to release. But Plague Tale is one of the big ones as well, and of course that comes out in 2 weeks. And of course I've already got that pre-installed, so I'm really looking forward to that. And shout out to Dealer, who put out the teasers the other day as well. Yesterday, in fact, he's now reviewing that, of course. So he said, let the game begin, and had the start menu up on Twitter yesterday. So big jealousy for that, of course, being able to play that now. Really looking forward to seeing what they've done with that game. Early impressions reviewed extremely well for Plague Tale. So yeah, that's going to be my most anticipated kind of one so far anyway, until Callisto comes out in the latter part of the year, in which case that's going to dominate everything.
Awesome stuff. Awesome stuff. Luke, what about you?
Yeah, I think if you if you would have asked me this a few days ago, I would have said Scorn. I've been looking forward to that for a long, long time. I followed that way back when it was in early development. As a HR Geiger fan, I mean, it's just like the best thing ever, really, in terms of game. And I think it's really interesting that it's essentially a puzzle game. It's a bit like Myst or something like that, but just first person with a little bit of combat. So that's cool. Gotham Knights, I was not looking forward to very much because I didn't think it looked very good apart from its very first early showing. So I was really worried about that, and that's coming from a massive Arkham fan in particular. Well, massive Batman fan in particular. I've literally got Batman statues around here, which you can't see, but so huge fan. I wasn't looking forward to it. However, as you said, the previews were actually very positive, which has kind of got me really hyped that now. So I was really worried about the combat. I didn't think the combat looked good at all, but apparently it plays really well. And even the Skill Up preview, which I'd recommend people go and check out, was really cool. And he seemed pretty, looking forward to it. He actually, the thing he really loved was the story from his preview. Anybody who's read the Court of Owls graphic novel before will know that it's really, really cool. And
it is.
I'm sure they'll have their own take. Obviously, they've got their own take on it. But it's really awesome stuff. So I think now, actually, I'm really looking forward to that the most, and I can't wait because I'll be getting it on PC, and I just hope that the PC port's good. But if it is, it means that the Steam Deck stuff.
There's always a risk with these Arkham games on PC, right?
Yeah. Well, to be fair, I got Arkham Knight runs on the Steam Deck, and it doesn't run that well on PC, but on Steam Deck it seems okay. I played that yesterday. It was really cool.
Cool.
So he's hoping.
Sweet. Another great question coming in from Richard. He asks, I would really want to hear of a game or series that you grew out of. For instance, it may be multiplayer games or shooters, or maybe some kind of collectible game such as Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something. Which is it and why? I also want to know that from the community, by the way. Type it in chat. Which games did you grew out of? For me, it's MMOs. I used to play MMOs. I loved them. I'm a big sucker for RPGs, and MMOs is But the thing is, they take up so much time. And when I became a father, I just had obviously less game time available, and MMOs are basically the thing I gave up. So yeah, it's MMOs for me.
I don't have a game style that I grew out of, and I was never into MMOs, so I didn't have the issue of like a World of Warcraft, etc., where I dropped it after a certain point. Everything that I have always played since the start, I still play now. So still play flight simulators, I still play RTS games, I still play JRPGs. I still play Pokemon. It's even like that was one of the first handheld games. I still buy the Pokemons. I still play them. So I haven't touched wood. Every genre or game style that I've always played, I still play to this day. I don't think there's any that I've got into that I've dropped. It was a really strange question to ask, actually, because it got us thinking. Like, have I dropped anything? Is there anything that I don't play anymore? But no, I think I still like, because there's still games that come out. Of course, every now and again you'll have a kind of a bit where you stop playing them for a bit because there isn't an interesting title in that genre. But then comes along like with JRPGs. Then we got the awesome Octopath Traveler, which then kickstarted let's get back into these again. Like, that's a really awesome game. And then the new, obviously, Flight Sim took a long time to get its next iteration. But when that came out, it was phenomenal. So then we had a good Flight Sim to play again. So yeah, it just depends. Might go on hiatus for a bit, but I never stopped playing them.
Nice. What about you, Luke? Did you grow out of something?
Yeah. I don't want to say grow out because that maybe it implies that the game was for children or something,
Yeah,
which this one definitely isn't. But I did grow out of a game, which was which I invested. I mean, across the various entries in this series, probably, I mean, legitimately, probably about 2,000, 3,000 hours, and that's the Football Manager series.
Oh God!
So yeah, yeah. I mean, 10 years ago, I was putting on that one,
actually. Thanks for reminding this.
Yeah. Because I was thinking, like, actually, I'm trying to remember, is there anything? And I was kind of like, oh, no, I don't think so. And actually, I think it's because I've repressed the memory of playing these games and smashing my, like, desk up because of various blobs on the screen not doing well. So yeah, I'm a huge football fan, and about 10 years ago, I mean, that was just like daily, like at university.
I remember my friends getting dressed up in suits for cup finals. And
yeah, getting your best one for the Champions League final and stuff. So that's the one for me that I've grown out of. Like, I cannot commit. Like, two reasons: I can't commit the time to those anymore. Like, it's impossible. And two, if I could, I'm actually quite worried that I would slip so easily back into it that I wouldn't be able to get out anymore. So I kind of just stay away. And unfortunately, they're bringing them to Game Pass every year now. Like, the new one's always released in date. So I'm like, oh God, I'm gonna stop.
Yep.
Yeah. Dave Ramos in chat says he grown out of playing Call of Duty and Overwatch religiously. Chargasm says, I play sometimes Halo Infinite multiplayer, but damn, I'm bad without much time training it. Yeah, that's the problem of a lot of multiplayer games. We have a Pyro. He says, I've dropped playing Gems of War and other freemium games as I'm too vulnerable to the psychological manipulation they use to get people to pay for microtransactions. So good thing you dropped out of them. I'd say here, Doom Reaper says he's dropped out of all sports games. So yeah, it's just some genre, some games we just grew out of. Doesn't mean they're bad. It stuff changes. Very good question. We have one from Brad Watt Fight coming in, and I think wondering, Dutch, that is something you have to answer. So 2 years later, what's your thoughts on Cyberpunk, mainline story, side story, driving, shooting, hand-to-hand, RPG mechanics? I think we already touched it a little bit upon it, but I think we generally agree it's a great time to play Cyberpunk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even now, I fondly remember the playthrough and the story and the way the story was implemented, and I loved. I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of that game. The only facet of that game that I think, from a playability perspective, that needed improvement for the next one is the way the cars handle in the vehicles. I think that it's terrible. It feels like you're driving a boat. It's whoa, and then like you turn a little bit too quick and the car spins out, and you're like, God, what is going on? So I had to refer to just driving motorcycles as they were the easiest to drive. The cars were terrible. If they can alter that and make that better for the next one, that would be highly appreciated. CDPR.
You know what I want? I want them to make cars cheaper, because I really like to buy them, but they are so expensive in the game. I can buy like so many other things that actually improve my character. In the game for the same amount of money. Cars are super expensive in the game, But I agree, man. I agree. And Luke, we already heard your thoughts on that, and that's why the next question goes to you from Doom Reaper. With all the gaming anniversaries coming up, which are you most excited for? A potential announcement or celebration? Flight Sim has 40 years, Fallout has 25 years, Mortal Kombat 30 years, The Witcher series 15 years. Man, you forgot to implement my favorite Age of Empires in that list. Also coming up with an anniversary. Luke, do you expect from all these anniversaries to come out something? Which one are you excited about?
Yeah, I think out of all of those, I mean, I think really we've already had it. Is The Witcher? We've already. I don't think they're going to do much for that. I mean, they'll do something, but the big announcement you would have wanted for that was commitment to more Witcher games, which we absolutely got. We got more than I think people were expecting. So yeah, the other ones less so. Actually, I think the flight sim one will be cool because I sporadically do dip back into that, and they're really good at doing these really cool support things. That just free content for the game and stuff. So I do like going back to that from time to time, just because it's just amazing. It's just an amazing piece of tech, regardless of what you think of it as a game. It's just an incredible piece of technology. So look, I always look forward to that, and whenever they do anything in that game, I'm always quite interested. So Fallout, I don't expect anything from, and I'm not particularly excited because I don't like Fallout very much. But but
I agree.
There we go.
To be fair,
I
need a new co-host now.
No, I'm very much more on the Elder Scrolls path.
Absolutely.
Don't get it wrong. I mean,
between the two, I also would prefer the Elder Scrolls. Still, Fallout is a fantastic game.
I've played Fallout, but then when I seen what Obsidian did with Outer Worlds, that was, to me, a far better implementation of a Fallout universe, essentially a Fallout style universe, obviously in space. I thoroughly enjoyed Outer Worlds and everything that it offered, and I'm more looking forward to Outer Worlds 2 than I am any future Fallout title.
Totally agree.
So I have to obviously mention Age of Empires, and they have already said that they have an actual announcement stream coming. So this coincides with the launch of Season 3. I know everyone hopes that the console version is going to be announced. Honestly, I'm really hoping that that there will be a console version, but realistically, I've played now 320 hours or so, 315 hours of Age of Empires 4, and for me, it's still hard to imagine how you would be able to port that over to a controller. The game is just so much, or relies so much on you grouping units together and having a mouse and keyboard available. It's for me, it's hard. I hope they find a way. I truly do, but I think that they will, with the launch of Season 3, finally announce that we have different ranked matches, and not just a 1v1, something like that. I truly hope for that. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait for that celebration of Age of Empires anniversary. But with that, the very last question of the day, and then I'll let you go. And I hope I can actually read that question properly. It's coming in from Sith Lord, and he asks, how much could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood?
Yes.
I want to know
as much wood as a woodchuck could chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood.
There you go. Luke, anything to add to that?
No, I'm not even going to try that. I'm not even going to try it.
I love it. All right, gentlemen. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here. This was an absolute awesome show. Also, a big shout out to everyone in chat. We had 120 people watching us live here today, which is absolutely bonkers. Amazing. Thank you so much for the support. Of course, a big thank you to Master Clowns and, of course, to everyone else for the support and the super chats, and simply, most importantly, for simply being here, because we wouldn't do this without you. You guys literally drive the show. You're the reason we do this and why we have so much fun here each and every week. And the last super chat comes in as we speak from Dave Ramos. He sends in $2 and says, gentlemen, have yourself a great evening. Thanks. Have a great evening yourself. Everyone in the community, I hope, has a great day, rest of the day. Luke, again, thank you so much for coming on. This was so enlightening, helpful, and insightful. from you to talk with us about, of course, the ABK deal, but also everything else. Again, thanks for coming on. Let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for having me on. Always an absolute pleasure, and just really enjoys the whole show. Not just the stuff that's kind of boring and interesting to me, like the merger stuff. Yeah, really loved it. You can find me at LukeSteele90 on Twitter. I'll just leave it there because then it's easy to find me elsewhere. So thank you very much.
You can click in the description of the show and you will find the link right there. Yeah, again, thanks, man, for coming on. We will have you back, and I promise you, once that entire ABK deal is over, and it won't be a topic in the podcast anymore, we will still have you on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime there's any M&A stuff, competition stuff, you just throw up the bat signal, so to speak, and I'll swoop down. And I'll be there. Awesome. I'll be there for you.
I'll pick you up on that. The community appreciates it. Dutch, also thank you for being here today. Let people know what you are working on, what you have coming up. Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Yeah, thank you. Of course, it's an awesome show as always. Great fun again today. Lots of insightful conversations as well, of course, with Luke. Same as last time. Great conversations there. Of course, if you like giveaways, chaps, and I know everybody loves giveaways, we have a pretty big giveaway ourselves as well at the moment, which anyone can get involved in. Doesn't kind of involve you doing anything other than following ourselves and following our partner as well, Frame a Game. We're doing a giveaway for God of War Ragnarok with an awesome display frame from Frame a Game. That is on my Twitter. Of course, you can find me on Twitter at Wondering Dutch and at YouTube at Wondering Dutch. All you have to do is subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow Frame a Game, retweet the tweet, and that's it. You've entered. Simple as that. It'll be drawn at the end of this month. And of course, get ready to ship when the game launches, and you'll have a copy of God of War Ragnarok. So that's awesome. Other than that, of course, every Wednesday and every Sunday, you can find us on the Midweek Mix-Up podcast with, of course, the wonderful World of Gaming host, Boxenberger, and the rest of our crew.
Exactly. Yeah, if this was a little bit too quick for you, again, click in the description of the show note. And you will find all the links right there at your convenience. All I have to say is, again, a big thank you, not just to these two gentlemen, but to everyone who joined up here today, everyone who listens after the fact, either on YouTube or on the podcast services around the globe. You can find the World of Gaming also on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts, you can find the World of Gaming. Thanks again to everyone who turned up. And I see you guys next week. Don't forget to game on.